This is the Take a Step podcast, where we equip young adults to live according to their purpose. If you've stumbled upon this episode, you are in for a treat because we've got an awesome conversation with Boyce Buckner. Boyce has a very impressive background. He came from a long line of a military family. He served active duty for almost 30 years as he's climbed the ranks over his career and currently serves for the Georgia National Guard. He was a student athlete, played football at West Point, and just has such a unique perspective on life. We talk about, some of the lessons he learned throughout his military career, the importance of relationships and surrounding yourself with a tribe of people who are working in the same direction and trying to achieve, the kind of things that you want to achieve. He's a man of devout faith and talks about how his relationship with Christ has evolved over the years and just, what it's done for him and his family. So it's just a great conversation. I know you guys will love it, and it's one where you're going to want to stay till the end because, when we start talking about the perspective he has on, why people struggle to really live according to their purpose, he has some really unique insights that I know you guys will love. So with that being said, let's jump straight into this episode with Boyce Buckner. What's going on, and welcome to the Take a Step podcast. I'm your host, Josh Johnston, founder of Take a Step. It's a community that's focused on bringing together like-minded individuals who are all purpose-driven towards taking action to maximize their God-given potential. If you find value in this podcast, please leave a rating and review on whichever platform you're listening. It really helps us to continue to grow this community and change more lives for the better. Feel free to give me a follow on social media at __take a step __, and reach out to me if you have any questions or just want to connect. With that being said, let's dive in. Boyce, what's going on? Excited to get you on the Take a Step podcast. I'm looking forward to getting to know you a little bit more and hearing more about your story because I've heard it's a little bit of a wild one. So thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'd love to just kind of get things kicked off by having you introduce yourself however you think it makes sense. So with that, I'll kind of turn it over to you.
No, I appreciate it, Josh. Thanks. So my name is Boyce. I met Josh through a ministry that we serve in together at Woodstock City Church called Inside Out. It's a high school youth ministry program that we both serve as group leaders for. And it's one of those things that you don't call things coincidences in Christianity. It's more of by design, right? And so in the end, I think that's probably best to describe, me by faith first. I've been a Christian for well over 30 years, serving in all kinds of different ministries and different duty assignments, and just trying to be, that good follower of the way, continuing learning, continuing growing, and continuing serving. In my family life, I've been married to my wife, Brandy, who I call my best friend, spiritual partner, and just, the person who is that gift of God, that just kind of guides you along the way in this journey we call life. We've been together since 2011, married 2012. We have two children, Mika and Zion. Mika, our daughter, is 9 going on 10, and our son Zion is 6. Both of them are special needs. They're autistic, and for those who aren't familiar with autism spectrum disorder, it's a disorder that just has some social and behavioral type things that causes delays, language delays, things that just you don't really think about or expect, when you're starting to have children, But I will tell you that, there's an adage about, God picks those parents for special kids, and I truly believe that for both of us because these two are special. Created perfectly in our eyes and his, and they're just amazing. And I think they are exactly what we needed to build what I would call just an amazing team Buckner, our family. On the other side of the coin, most people are probably curious what I do for a living. And so I have been in the military going on 24 years. My journey began, as a kid. I was born into it. My military history lineage in my family, we call ourselves a green family or the long green line because we just have a lineage that dates back to the Civil War to present day, one active duty service member career since then to now. And so when you think like Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan, I'm the real thing, the man, the myth. And so So yeah, I'm a colonel in the Army. After navigating the Army kid life and growing up in multiple places around the world and country, ended up excelling in a lot of things, academic, service, and in athletics. And that led me to an opportunity to go to the United States Military Academy at West Point to play football there. Did, the full time at West Point, graduated and commissioned in 2001, just prior to 9/11. So kind of a big, year and mark in our history. Became a helicopter pilot and has served in that capacity as a leader, an aviator, a soldier, up until present day. Current duty assignment now, I'm blessed to have the opportunity to serve alongside the Georgia National Guard. It is a unique advisory assignment where I am a special active duty advisor to the commander of the Georgia National Guard, who's a political appointee, two-star general selected by the governor himself, Governor Kemp. And so I help advise, this amazing leader and team on all things readiness for future fight to how they, can potentially enhance systems, processes, leader development, you name it. They've got me in the middle of everything, and it's fantastic. I love what I do. I love the team, and I could not have asked for a better job to finish my Army career. So I'm 2 years out from retirement and very excited about that. And we'll see what life has in store from there. On the side, been able to attain a few degrees. So a couple master's degrees in education, a leader coaching certificate through the ISC. And so at this point, it's just allowing God to kind of direct, what our next steps are and what we're doing. And in the meantime, I continue to just do what I love, which is spending time with family, serving, and, trying to, I think just be that obedient follower of the way. So.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, just kind of going back into your childhood. What was it like for you growing up in a family that has a lineage of a military history? What was that experience like for you?
It's a lot of things. I think some people wonder what it would be like to move every 3 years and to go to a foreign country and learn a new culture, a new language, experience new things. Some people, wonder what it was like to be around, a military, installation, or see, people in uniform and training and stuff. And I would tell you, for us, it was normal, right? That's all
Mm-hmm.
that we knew, because that's all that really, our family had been a part of. Big patriotic family, a big family of service. So I think, in addition to our faith, our practice and values of everyday life just kind of seemed natural and normal. So for me as a kid growing up, I loved moving. I loved going to places I'd never been before. I loved meeting new people, trying new things, and it afforded me opportunities. Like we're in the middle of the Summer Olympics right now. Well, I got to go live, in the Summer Olympics 1988 in Seoul, Korea, and so I would say there's some pretty amazing stuff, that comes with that. And I think it taught a lot that I think is very important, as you talk about formative years of people growing up, independence, determination, character, initiative, resolve, courage, a lot of things that I think younger, like adults growing up still are having some struggles with these days, trying to figure out how to do that and how to be self-confident, how to walk to a completely new football team and walk on and try out and take a position from somebody, and those kinds of things. Not that I did that, it's just one of those things that I think, it's always presented, a unique set of circumstances, that I'm very grateful for,
Mm-hmm. So how
Tough
long?
at times. Oh,
Go
sorry, go
ahead.
ahead.
No, I was gonna say, like, how long? What was the longest time period you're in one place?
Longest time period I would say was just close to 4 years, and
Where
that
was
was in
that?
Nebraska. Yeah, so we were in a place called Bellevue, Nebraska, where Offutt Air Force Base is at. My dad was doing a joint assignment where he flew on Air Force One as an air defense officer. So they have a person that's an expert in missiles, surface to air, and how they protect the aircraft from that. And so I went to seventh, eighth grade in the same junior high, and then went to freshman, sophomore year in my high school there. And then we had to move right in the middle of my sophomore year.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, almost 4 years.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
So like as you kind of evolved through your childhood, like at what point did you always know that the military was your path, or did it take you a while to come to grips with that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Josh. I would tell you that I loved what I did as an Army kid growing up
Mm.
until it started getting harder, right? And I think you can probably imagine those formative years as a teenager, where relationships are starting to matter, where resumes and teams
Hmm.
and achievements are starting to stack up, and even friends, And I think for me, it was hard to leave Nebraska because my church and church youth group was so amazing. I was becoming incredibly successful very quickly in high school. Those first 2 years, I had developed roots, and I didn't want to pack up and go. And so it really came to a head where I was telling my parents I would rather just stay with my best friend and his family for the last 2 years and graduate high school, in which they considered, but then, they said no. And so we moved forward in life, right? And so I would say that to me, was where things started to get hard, because I didn't understand why I had to move, other than the Army, right? Didn't care for that very much at that point. I think I became a little jaded and a little bit, maybe in a sense, like just disgruntled at my father, at his career, and how it took him away from some of those key things that I started noticing, like missing birthdays, missing
Yep.
holidays, not understanding the why. I think it just all boils down to, you're so focused on self as a teenager, you don't really see, the rest going on around you. And so I would say all the way up until about my, senior year, when I had to decide which school I was signing on with. I thought West Point offered the best deal. They gave the best tour, and offered the best options, even to the point where I still wasn't quite certain about going into the Army. And so I was offered an opportunity to go to the West Point Prep School first, get a feel for everything, and then decide if I wanted to continue or not. So it was kind of like a redshirt freshman, all of my peers graduating high school. And so that's what I did, Josh. Was I decided to give myself an extra year, let myself grow up a little bit, see if I can get over this Army stigma and military stigma, and I did. Ultimately, I fell in love with the camaraderie that I had immediately with my teammates, the what I would call the history, and the heritage tied to the alma mater that I was soon to graduate from,
Mm.
and just kind of the inspirational individuals I had the opportunity to meet and speak with, folks like General Norman Schwarzkopf, where I met at an Army Air Force game. And so I think, ultimately, you just kind of, like anything else in high school, it comes in seasons and it leaves in seasons. And so I was able to move past that.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
What was it like playing? What's it like being an athlete at a military institute?
Uh, I wish I could give you a comparison between, like a standard college, like the University of Georgia to, Florida State or whomever. I couldn't really tell you that, other than just high school camps, of what I got impressions of. But from my teammates who played, I feel like, they had a struggle between social life, you know, basically football being everything at college in order to succeed, and then their grades, and if they were going to enter the draft or graduate. My situation was different. I had to balance, a military curriculum, that required me to do, military training in the field, for example, my sophomore summer, where I entered at 5'10", 235 pounds. And by the end of the 8th week, I was leaving there 5'10", 205, running
Mm.
around in the woods and just losing all of that, spring built muscle and speed, right? Early mornings, which I think for any college student, nobody wants to get up at 4 a.m. But freshman year, that's what I did every day, delivering newspapers to seniors back then when we had newspapers, because that's what was, tasked for us to do, right? As freshmen, or what we call plebes there.
Mm.
Um, Long academic days. The average West Point curriculum, for a student that graduates there with, let's just say, a major and a minor, their major of choice and a minor in engineering, is they'll leave with almost enough credit hours for 2 degrees.
Wow.
And so when you leave, you think about like that workload of academics alone. heavy in the STEM side of the house, it definitely puts you to work on the intellectual and mental side. And so once you're done with classes, you roll out to practice, and you spend all that extra time and energy and, your position rooms watching film, team meetings, out to the field, practicing until sunset, late dinners. And I would get back to my room, I would say about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, maybe have a couple of hours to, do homework or do whatever I could, to kind of keep everything afloat. And I would probably pass out either in my bed or on my desk at about 11:30 to midnight, and wake up a few hours later to start over again. So that was kind of the initial years of doing that. It got better sophomore year, obviously, when you're not a freshman at West Point, things kind of lighten up on you, kind of, but then it gets harder academically, and so give or take, I would say in some it would be, challenging for freshmen in the sense of, having to do these duties and things that kind of, instill humility, right? And make you, as a top recruit, feel like you're not as important as you think you are. Heavy on the academic side throughout the entire experience. And then the athletic commitment, and giving up weekends and holidays and all those things, all the way through. It's busy, and it's a high demand. But I will tell you that when you think the reward, the reward of being able to play collegiate level football with some of the, most amazing people, and I'm talking my teammates, my closest friends out of the academy, the large majority of them were the people that I played, football with, and they're gone on to be amazing, human beings, whether they're still in the military or they've gone on and started their own companies or whatever it is that they've decided to do post-military, but all of which just, again, it started out with, amazing people, amazing athletes, and so, yeah, that's kind of it.
Yeah. And I think, going through that grind together kind of molds and like the common saying, iron sharpens iron, being around people
Right.
that are, driven towards, a similar mission. There's something so powerful about that. Cause I played college baseball, and for me, I played at a small school. So like for me, the difference there is, most of the guys who went to, school with me to play baseball were there for baseball. They were there, that like everyone says that, you're a student athlete that's pushed heavily, but, everyone knows that like the reason you are at the university is to play baseball. And then, wherever you go to college, you're going to get the college education. So, I mean, it was that's kind of what I'm hearing as far as the main differences is there's so much, like I feel like everybody has a greater understanding for what the ultimate mission is of being at the university or being at, West Point. Football is a huge thing that brings people together, but I feel like there's just so much more missionality involved in like the greater purpose of being at the school.
Yeah, I think that's a good, assessment, Josh. The truth is that most of the athletes that go there, they can range from, moderately recruited athlete out of high school to like top recruit, right? And I think some look at it as a safe school because if they get injured, they don't lose their scholarship.
Yeah.
Others, look at it as I wanted to play college ball. This is my opportunity to do that. I'm getting a great education and I know what I'm getting myself into next. And some, will come there and think, like I'll just get by as a football player and not do anything else. And some succeed at that, some don't, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast too. It is a challenging, formative collegiate experience, and really and truthfully it is to find and mold that leader to be that future Army officer. And it is designed, to help remove some of the, the folks that are maybe not as committed to that mission, like you're highlighting,
Yeah. I mean, do you think because you played football, it prepared you better once you stepped into the line of duty, or was there not a lot of correlation there whatsoever?
I think there's 100% correlation, and really what it ties to is that the Army, you don't function in the Army singularly. It doesn't matter if you're on a special ops, elite unit team, or you're at a large scale unit. In the end, it's a team. And when you understand how to be a part of a team, sacrifice for the team, the commitment, the mission, the character it requires, the adversity you're going to encounter, because you will. It's just a matter of time. I think that all those things, easily transcend, from one spectrum to the other.
Mm.
And I think that, when I look at some of my peers, who have excelled extremely well, maybe they had some struggles in academics or militarily, but ultimately graduated, is the majority of who I would say were the guys that were athletes or the gals that were athletes, continue to excel. And to me, I don't think that that's an anomaly. I think that that's just kind of given, what does it take to succeed, in a challenging environment, right? And so, I think that it definitely correlates, and I think that I could say probably for the Naval Academy and the Air Force Academy and Coast Guard Academy, those are all probably very similar too.
Yeah, yeah. Just the dynamic of working within a team, communication, like, reliance outside of self. I can see how a lot of that.
Purpose, mission, all
Yeah,
those things, right?
for sure. So, well, I mean, on that note, I know probably got a little bit of a loaded question here, but like, what are some throughout your military experience? What are some lessons that you learned through the military that, and even some that might shock some people, because obviously there's discipline. Everyone knows about the discipline. Everyone knows about the ability to adapt. Being able to fight under very high pressure situations. But anything that, like, any lessons you learned that might surprise some people about your military experience?
Yeah, I think that the quintessential perspective, and maybe I'm generalizing, but I think a lot of people see military leaders as these big, like star wearing, scarves flapping in the wind with their sunglasses on, giving these speeches on the Hill like General Patton or General MacArthur or things like that, right? Or your modern day leaders. And I would tell you that there is some truth to that, and there's time for that. But to me, some of the greatest things that I learned over time, whether it was watching the leaders in my family, that were all senior leaders and retired with 20 plus to 30 years in, or others around me growing up in the military, um, I learned that humility is probably one of the strongest weapon systems that you can have as an Army leader. And I say that because if you can find a way to keep yourself grounded, if you can find a way to be a better listener, even if you know the answer, right? But just to allow somebody to speak to be heard. If you can, um, put your own pride aside to be able to help focus on the bigger picture, the team, the mission, whatever it may be. Those were not things that were bred into me, growing up and in through West Point, and I would tell you that to me, it's not saying anybody did anything wrong. It's just saying that I think that I learned from observing some of our more powerful leaders, throughout time, is being able to, speak softly, speak with intentionality, and remain humble, even when there's the opportunity for you to be out front and recognized. To me, is what I think is really and truly when you have arrived to what I would call a PhD level in leadership, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
and I
think,
think I've heard people talk about how the most dangerous man in the room is often the quietest man in the room. And I usually attribute that back to someone who is confident and has the confidence, knows what they're capable of. They typically don't need to voice that and be the loudest about it. Usually the people who are the most boastful about whether their success, how dangerous they are, whatever it may be relative to the environment they're in. I've noticed some of the most successful people I know don't need to talk about it, and I feel like it goes hand in hand with what you're talking about. How the leaders who are the most lethal are reserved and treat their experience with humility, like you're talking about.
yeah, and I think there's something to be said. There was a phrase that I had growing up saying that, that the leader that has to tell you that they're in charge, or the commander that has to say I'm the commander, is the one to watch out for, right?
Mm.
Because we got problems that they're having to tell you what they do or who they are. Um, anybody that has to lead by resume versus lead by action,
Mm.
those types of things I think are all indicative of, some potential trouble, right? Or some potential red flags that you might have to watch out for if they're, immediately over you or people that you know and love. But that's not to say that, that there isn't a time and a place for that either. I think that there is sometimes, you will be, as a leader, challenged by people that you serve, by others where they don't know. And so they're asking questions. They want to get to know you, they want to understand your context, your background, what you've done. And so sometimes people, call it like humble bragging. To me, it's like if it's in response to somebody who really is genuinely interested and wants to understand like education background or prior assignments, or experience, for that matter. If it's coming from a place of love and humility, I feel like those things are okay for a leader to be able to engage in that regard, and then leave it at that afterwards, right? And so there, to me, like, it goes back to another principle I think that's critical, is communication. And it's not talking, it's effectively, delivering a message per the personality of whomever you're talking to or the audience you're speaking to, as well as ensuring that it's been received and understood and comprehended, right? That to me is effective communicating, not just firing off words and then telling somebody, well, I said that already, but really, do you receive what I'm saying and how I've said it, or do I need to deliver it in a different way? And so I would tell you that to me, I really had wished that somebody would have helped me hone those skills a little bit more, growing up in my younger years in the Army. Thankfully, I've had leaders that I've watched and modeled and learned how to do that, and really focused and worked on those skills, especially, active listening, and what I call now listening with curiosity. I feel like those to me are great tools for up and rising leaders, just because it's getting past, the superficial and the surface level stuff and really honing in on, if you are in charge of people, and they're speaking, to listen and not sit there and go why or judge, but really try to get at the root of things, to understand, to comprehend, to be curious, and to try to figure out how then can I transform this discussion into something that is purpose driven, into, attaining greater potential or greater results out of this individual, or simply just addressing an issue that might be solvable, that might have been brought to you, and you have the ability to address that. So to me, I think that's a critical thing, number two, that I'd learned, in my journey in leadership. And I would tell you the third, and what I would say is the most important, personally, Josh, is just that leadership is not unique to the Bible. It's not unique to Christianity. And to me, it took me about half of my career to realize that the Army and the military in the United States does not have, the all-seeing, I am the expert at everything, and we're the gurus, right? And I think that sometimes that's the perception. The truth is when you read the Bible, when you look at, how Jesus modeled himself as a leader, and you really dive in and study those leaders, right? And the different leadership styles, the passive style of Moses to the, extroverted style of David, is you'll find that there is examples of exceptional leadership, the how-to guide, if you will, to take everything from 3,000 300 warriors to go out and fight like Gideon, right? Or to preach to the masses like Jesus did and engage everybody, not one but thousands, right? And so I think in the end, as a Christian man, being able to sit back and go, I should have been looking at this from the jump and applying that to my military leadership growth, as opposed to vice versa, thinking that I was applying my military, abilities to my Christian faith and my service. I realized very quickly I had it backwards, and in those life lessons you kind of learn along the way, but I'm glad I did, and I'm glad I had people in my life to model and demonstrate that for me, amazing leaders like my grandmother, who I would tell you was the most graceful, peaceful, and humble person I've ever known, and modeled that to me her entire life, and it wasn't until maybe a few years ago I started to really, truly realize how powerful of an example that was to me, so those would probably be the big three I'd give to you that would probably surprise a lot of people when it comes to like what I think are my most important lessons gained,
Yeah, definitely. And like to go back to what you were talking about with communication, and I loved like kind of the idea of active listening or listening with curiosity. Because like we know those people when we're having those conversations, you can tell while you're talking, they're just looking for the next thing that they're going to say. They're not actually listening. And I think when you realize you're in that conversation, it's so hard to take it past, base level. It's so hard to actually go deep because when you have two people just trying to get their own opinions heard, there's no curiosity there. So there's no way to go that next level deeper into a conversation. And I think it's very hard to understand. Like if I'm trying to communicate with you and I'm trying to lead you in a certain way, how can I lead you without being curious and knowing everything about your situation so that I can effectively lead you in the right way? And I think that's what a lot of people get wrong. Is it's not just. I heard someone say it this way. I love the coaching industry, as you know, and I heard someone say when you're coaching someone, you're not giving advice, you're giving experience. And in order to give experience, you need to know what their experiences are. So, I mean, do you see a level of resonance with kind of that, like how you navigate conversations and prying and prodding a little bit deeper to understand where someone's at? Is that kind of what you're getting at with that curiosity?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's actually, I learned that phrase from my coaching course in this past year. And the idea is that, like you said, you're engaging at a different level, so if you imagine you and I are having a conversation and you are listening to respond is what I would call that, right? Where you're trying to get at something and you're just talking with your intentions and not really worried about mine. Is I have enough, presence of mind to be able to stop for a minute and go, hey, Josh, if we're trying to have a conversation about X, Y, and Z, is I feel like right now the place that you're at, and this is just an observation, is you really just have some stuff that you want to get off your chest, and I'm a listening ear. So by all means, if that's what you need right now, fire off, fire away, like what's going on, what's on your mind, and just let it ride, because sometimes that's the outlet that people need, that they've looked at you in that regard. If they're coming back, if you said, no, actually, I didn't even realize that, I'm sorry. Hey, no worries. Let's get back to what we're working on. Right. And in that conversation, orient on what is the coaching objective that we're really trying to get after. And I would add, when you're talking about experience, I think experience is fantastic to have, especially if you have a wide berth of different things that kind of are connective tissue, because that story and connection and wisdom and experience to me lets you have a better rapport with the person you're coaching. What I would even add to that is saying that I think an effective coach, especially a coach of leaders, is able to guide with powerful questions so that leader being coached is able to have some self-actualization, to realize, that they had the answers all along, or they had the tools, or they had the tribe, the community to be able to help them to what it is, that they're trying to achieve, or to overcome the obstacle that's preventing them from moving forward in that first step. Right. And that's what I think is powerful about coaching. That's what I think is powerful about leader development, is through the years, I've done this for so long that, it's almost become addictive, right? You run into an organization that says, hey, this organization is the best, that it's ever going to be, and there's nothing you can do to make it better. Okay, well, challenge accepted, and then I love, being able to work with organizations and people like that, helping them realize that was just maybe a self-consciousness, or a subconscious thought that they were having, at the time of insecurity. And once security was gained, we've gone through that whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the storming, norming, forming, conforming, and just added on to what we had, built that momentum of success that they already had, and helped them realize that there was actually things that we, didn't do as well as we thought, and we improved upon that and made the organization better, or others that, we would set these, wild and crazy goals that they're like, there's no way that we can achieve these things. It's never been done before. And I'm like, challenge accepted. I think it's great. I think that we have the potential, and what we need to do is be able to bring everybody in, get that, that whole buy-in, the coalition all together. And once we do, how do we get there? How do we plan it out, resource it? How do we follow that with milestones along the way? and then see how we perform and measure that,
Yeah. And I
so to me,
love how like how the military shapes like the whole concept of goal setting and communicating
yeah,
the mission. I mean, a lot of people certainly have heard of it, but Extreme Ownership by Jocko, last year. And, one of my, probably the chapter or the topic he was getting at that's always comes back to me the most is, because you're assigned your missions, right? So it's not like you pick the goal or you set the standard, like, or you set the standard, but it's not like you get to pick your goal or you get to pick the mission. And he said from a leading a platoon from that perspective, being able to effectively communicate the mission, even when up front you don't necessarily agree with what that goal is. So how do you, like, from your perspective, do you have experience, having a specific objective that you might not necessarily have agreed upon with, right when it was ordered, but you had to communicate that and inspire a group of people to go alongside that objective?
yeah, the one that comes to mind first, Josh, was I was a commander during COVID of an organization that you know, wasn't able to stand down. I was designated as that team that needed to continue mission. High priority mission with a lot of things going on. And so we took it in stride, which was fine with us. We knew what we signed up for. We knew that there was an importance to what we did. If the Secretary of Defense had said, we need y'all to continue getting after it. And so that's what we did, was we figured out what we needed to do based on the knowledge we had. We requested the resources that we could to protect everybody, put everyone else who was at high risk of anything that we knew that could potentially get sick and die from COVID one. And then we began to execute, with the best that we had. When the vaccine started to come around, there was obviously a lot of controversy tied to that. And this is not to get political or to
No way.
judge,
Controversy
anybody's
about what?
decisions. Yeah, I know. But to judge, in any way, this is just me as Boyce Buckner sharing with you the answer to your question, which was,
Yeah.
I had to speak to all of my formation, about the vaccine, and go through the implementation and accountability of that, right? And the way that I had to navigate that space was reminding myself, number one, that that I signed on and swore an oath, to the Constitution, to the President of the United States, that I would execute my lawful orders and serve the office of which I was appointed to do, the
Mhm.
oath of officership, right? I swore to, command and lead these soldiers, families, and civilians to my team to the best of my ability, and at the end of the day, I had some internal struggles with how the vaccine was being informed, how it was being briefed by medical personnel, and I'm sure it was different in every, installation, but from my perspective, I think that what would have been, the right approach, which is what I tried to shape every time that I had to get up in front of everyone, was, the medical doctor or medical, professional would get up and basically tell everybody that they needed to get the vaccine or choose to get the vaccine when it was their choice back then. They would field questions without really having information or answers, whether it came to efficacy, dangers, anything of that nature. And at this point in time, I mean, we have to remember everyone was very scared about what was going on. There wasn't much
Yep.
known, to COVID at that point. And I think a lot of guys were just very concerned about putting something in their bodies that may have caused more harm than good, especially if they were deemed very healthy, which many soldiers are.
Yeah.
And I was the same way. And so I think, the way that I had to overcome that obviously is a lot of prayer, a lot of, just discussion with my local campus pastor there in Virginia, and really come out and just say, hey, listen, number one, team, we have to understand, that a choice is given now, right? And that's, I think, through the circumstances. But you all have to also, make sure that you reflect back on what is a legal order. You have to reflect back on why you signed up to do what you do. And remember that for all of us who've deployed in the past, is when we got on that aircraft to deploy to Iraq, Afghanistan, or anywhere else that we deployed all over the world, is sometimes those were accompanied with shots that we were not ready for, right? But they were designated, for a specific reason. It was to wartime readiness and so on. And so, putting that brave face on and trying to help everyone to kind of think through and tell them that I'm not directing you to do anything, right? It's your choice right now. But know that if you are ordered by Secretary of Defense, that is a legal order that you will have to weigh out and decide what you want to do from there, And so I would think that that's probably the best example I can give you of something similar to what Jocko is speaking on, being handed a mission that could be controversial or could result in, some collateral damage or death, or, as you kind of assess, risk in your own mind. And that was probably one that I struggled with personally and professionally. But,
Yeah.
Again, that's what we do, is we're paid to be able to think and navigate those circumstances and find a way to do that. That is, in line with our values, how we lead and our regulation, our U.S. code, and so on, because that's what we're also signed on to defend.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of counsel do you have when making those decisions? I know you talked about, you would talk to your local campus pastor, obviously a lot of prayer, but
yeah.
Did you have any appointed, members that you could go to and seek counsel for that, or were you that counsel?
No, it's a great question. But yes, I think that, a multitude of minds, especially of people that you trust, is an extreme advantage to have the more senior you are as a leader, right? That inner circle of people that they understand the direction, the mission, the vision, the legal aspects, everything that could, basically take away from the good that you all are moving towards. I think that those people are the ones that I would always lean on, especially in positions of command. And so speaking with my, assigned military lawyer and legal staff to understand what the implications are if a soldier said, no, I don't want to get the vaccine, and then said, no, I don't want to do it when it was directed as an order to them. My medical officer, who I had the utmost trust in, because she was not trying to toe the party line of what you may have seen on CNN or Fox News or whatever you were watching at the time in social media. She was about the science, and she was about the facts that were known and trying to help commanders make good decisions, because she understood the implication that the risk wasn't hers to bear, that she wasn't a commander, she was an advisor, that I held all the risk, and so she tried to arm me with as much factual medical data and evidence to make good decisions. And I loved her for that. She was amazing. And I still think one of the best medical doctors I've ever served with in the military. Obviously, I have my wife, who is my top advisor next to the man upstairs. Brandy has always been, to me, a more level, just easygoing personality that just kind of sees life in a different scope and is quite opposite to the military. And so it's always nice to have that unique advisor that is just not tied to what you do, but brings perspective, that you might not have had otherwise. And then I would say, senior enlisted advisors that are always paired with you, that you command with, mentors and friends, and others that may have gone ahead and had those situations before I encountered them. I think that all in all, it was a pretty large circle, but I would tell you the ones that had the greatest weight were the spiritual leaders in my life, my wife, as well as, my medical and legal staff, I would say, are probably the biggest ones.
Yeah. Then I just to kind of speak to the power of, the people you put around you, because I think that's so prevalent. And like what you just said is, it's so cool to hear you say that at that level, because it's the same thing I talk about with guys who are, with my high school guys. I feel like that the power of understanding the value of the people around you is relative to wherever you are in life at any level, whether you're just getting started, you're building brand new friendships, or you're, well established. Some of the top CEOs in the world surround themselves with people with guys that they respect, because they know that they're going to make them better. And I've said this so many times in the past, and anybody who knows me knows that this is probably my favorite quote in the world, but it's something that Andy Stanley said when he said, "Show me your friends, I'll show you your future."
Absolutely.
And I love that, because we can take our friends or just our closest relationships as our most valuable assets. And it's almost, I look at it as a little bit of a life hack. You know, if I claim to be, you know, to say I want to be a certain person in 10, 20, 30 years, okay, go find people that embody the traits of someone who's living that life.
Exactly.
And that will fast track your path to getting there just by being around them.
Yeah.
I just love hearing you say that from such a high level perspective, how it still relates, no matter if you're, at such a high ranking position in the military to someone who's in high school trying to figure out what they want to do in the next 2-3 years. So I love hearing you say that.
Well, I think just to add on to, Andy Stanley is he's highlighting the criticality of relationship when you think about it, right? And what really matters, in this walk of life, your relationship with Christ, your relationship with the people closest to you, and how selective you are to that, right? And I think when you take a look at some of those, like for example, incredibly successful actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone, as you're starting to see these Netflix trends of stories and documentary of life, and starting to realize that their ultimate theme that they've realized in all of the success and all of their failure is that the relationships in their lives mattered the most.
Yeah.
And the people who had the most impact in their lives typically are the ones that you didn't see in Hollywood, right? Didn't see them line up in a film with or anything like that, and to your point about pursuing, those relationships, we just had this conversation in my Inside Out group, and I shared with them that, when I got back to high school, of how many people that I'm still friends with today. When you talk about like the relationships out of all the people that you were trying to please or be connected with or whatever, the two closest people that I have, that I still are in contact with out of the hundreds, in high school, right? Two. In comparison to the people that I chose to surround myself with at West Point, people that I sought that made me better in areas that maybe I wasn't as good. My best friend that lives here in the Canton area, Kyle Barton, he to me was an absolute just tremendous example to be around, Christian, born and raised, wonderful family, also a great lineage and history at West Point. But what I loved about him was his confidence in self, his ability to, like just think independently and not just go with the group think scenario. He was incredibly intelligent, but he had a work ethic, that I absolutely was impressed with. And the one thing I always prided myself in was my work ethic, so that ought to tell you, like he had something special that just resonated with me. And especially when it came to academics, to me, like he set such a great example of scholar, athlete, everything that I just said, this is a dude that I want to be around, a guy who I just want to stay connected with, and just get better, like absorb what he's putting out there, get some of that and do the same, and he would tell you the same thing about me because he's just awesome like that. But Kyle is definitely one of those that I would say is a huge influence, in my life, both spiritually, as well as like in any other application. And to this day, we're still great and amazing friends, but that's what I try to impart upon, our Inside Out, brothers and sisters, is that, those relationships that matter are the ones who are investing in you, to achieve your ultimate potential, the people that you want to really be around, but maybe perhaps you're like, well, but they're not necessarily in the squad that I'm in, or they're not, rolling in the same whatever, or they don't have the same clothes or money or whatever matters to high school students these days, how many followers they have on Instagram or Snapchat, or I don't even know, but my point is that it's seeing past, all of what I would call that surface level stuff on the glacier and really getting to the root of what's underneath the water, and so, yeah, totally agree. Totally see the same.
Mm-hmm. And for context, Inside Out's the high school ministry that we serve in.
Yes.
But I was having the same conversation on relationships because that's what the topic was this past Sunday. But I was talking with some of my guys on, kind of what I mentioned a second ago about like having like looking for those characteristics about, the kind of person you want to be. And then it kind of came to mind, a lot of kids, and myself included, up until about a couple of years ago, have never taken the time to look at who they actually want to be. So in
Yeah.
order to make the decisions about, putting yourself around people that embody those character traits, you need to know and clearly define, who is the kind of person you want to be? What does my desired future really look like? And be very specific about it so that you can have a foundation to build off of when making decisions about who you're going to be, who you're going to put around you. And that's always been my, foundation as far as, whether if it's relationships, whether if it's a career, whatever you're pursuing, it's in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The second
Yep.
habit is begin with the end in mind.
Yeah.
And that I've taken that, and that's the foundation for almost anything I do. Is like, if I'm going to pursue something, there I have to see and understand, all right, what's the end goal of this venture in order for
Yeah.
me to actually take action and take practical steps in the now. Because if we don't do that, we're just winging it, and we're going to end up with wherever we go day by day with no plan.
And I think some people, to your point, Josh, you know, they have leaders in their lives who can help facilitate that, right? And I think that
Yeah.
that's why I think leadership is such a just an exceptional field to be a part of. Is when you know and understand, like this group of young men that we have the opportunity to lead, right? And to your discussion, we were having the same about what kind of Christian are you trying to be? What kind of follower of Jesus are you trying to be? What kind of person are you trying to be in high school? Think relative to whatever scenario that you're in, and draw from that. Because the truth is some people see this as like some big, pontification. It's like, oh wow, this is all profound, and I'm gonna roam around in a white robe, with a halo around me glowing. It's like, no, dude, that's not what we're saying. Do you want to be a kind person? Is that what you want to be known as? Somebody who speaks with grace, and with love, and just people look at and sees the joy pouring out of you, and like, I want some of that. Why are you that way? Do you want to be that person that is able to stand firm, and stand up for others? Like what is it that you really see yourself doing? Because everyone has their own unique design and personality. And I think if they're listening to the Holy Spirit, chatting inside that consciousness that they hear, I think in the end that's something that will come, right? So,
Yeah, for
sorry, I
sure.
had a call coming in. There we go.
Don't worry.
And so, I think that's the most critical thing about working with leaders, right? Or in an organization, is saying, well, what does the organization define the leaders to be, so that we understand what the attributes, characteristics, dynamics that you want to see out of them, so that the people in those positions, are able to then develop those plans based on personality, develop them, help them grow, mature, mentor, teach, and coach along the way, and meeting them where they are. I think that's the other struggle we have is, it's understanding, that not every single person comes from the same background, the same, conditions, and that some need more work than others. Others are naturally inclined in areas that some might not be. And how do you do that, and still hone into that potential to help them rise and grow into what you see, or what God sees, their ability to achieve, and I think it's special. I really do. But yeah, when you start with that objective in mind, you have something to move towards, and you also have something that you can kind of assess along the way to ask, is this the right objective we're trying to get to as you're hitting those milestones? Or is there something different, that we might need to modify along the way, or refine along the way too, But yeah, I think that's definitely a classic military approach to things too, right? What's our
Yeah.
end state, and then what is our road to get to that end, and how are we going to measure that over time?
Yeah, and I think when defining what that future is, what you were taught, you mentioned this when talking about your close buddy that lives in the Canton area. One of the things you said about him was being able to think for himself, and being able to
Mm-hmm.
think for yourself and not base my decisions or who I want to be. This is where I was going with that is a lot of people when they're first figuring out what that is, they'll base it on someone else's life, or they'll look
Mm-hmm.
at someone else and be like, hey, they look like they have it together. Like, what did they do? Let me base. But is that what you want? Like, is that who you are? Does that bring you joy and fulfillment?
Yeah.
Because so many people are so scared to be different. To one another one of my favorite quotes. I heard it from Chris Williamson on the Modern Wisdom podcast, but he said, following the herd makes us feel safe, but something stands out because of contrast, become extraordinary by being different. Because like in line with that quote, following the herd, doing what everyone else does, being who everyone else is easy. And like if that's your goal is to be normal, then do that. But most people who want to, live an extraordinary life and want to, experience their own joy and not someone else's joy, that's when in that stage of clarifying what that kind of person is that I want to be, it needs to be out of free thinking and thinking for yourself and not basing anybody else's lifestyle choices on, who you want to become.
Yeah, and I think it's important, when you consider, that type of growth mindset, it's like you have to consider first what are the values that's most important to you, right? Mm-hmm. And I think when you start asking deep questions like that, the answers start to surface. Mm-hmm. They know the answers to those questions. We all did. It wasn't like we just sat back one day and said, I'd like to fail at this, or I'd like to not do that, or whatever it may be. No, we said, we wanted to go forth and do these great and wonderful things. And we had people along the way that may have helped shape that. And in the end, I think when we as leaders consider that, and asking them, define the values to you. Like if you ask me today, I would tell you, that I have 3 primary principal values in my life that guide how I, grow and mature and do what I do in my everyday. It's my faith, it's my family, and I call it my force. It's my force is, the team that I serve here in Georgia, or the United States Army, or it is, serving Woodstock City Church and Inside Out, ministries. The force encompasses friends and extended family members and whoever else that's within that, but you kind of get the idea, right? It's whoever, falls second to my immediate family, my wife and my 2 children, and to God, that's what my priorities and values in life are, right? And so then you can start to get into the leadership aspects of what's most important, or the type of leader I want to be from number 1 down, the purpose-driven leader that's doing what I think God is telling me to do in, this life that I have with the gifts, talents, skills, and abilities that I have, to be the best husband to Brandy, to be the best father to Mika and Zion, to go out and be the best leader and soldier that shows, a world full of hate, that you can be filled with love and still have an amazing career doing the things that I've had the opportunity to do, or to walk into, church and transition, into being a leader in that forum and spread these same type of ideas that we once thought were so novel and limited to books and military and whoever else. No, it's give the high school and junior high students access to this. Let them learn now, and pour into them, right? Or in your community, in your everyday life, right? How do you do that? And I think to me, you start with values, and instilling that and kind of solidifying that and allowing them to kind of develop their own internal charter, their own internal covenant, right? And once that sets, then you move forward from there. Think about
when did you instill those values for as far as that foundation for you?
For me, I would say that when I actually, realized it, I would say more than instilled it. I think it's always been instilled for me, Josh. I think it was just groomed that way, but it wasn't really that I gave it like the full recognition, that it was until probably a few years ago, right? Coming to the realization as I'm thinking back on, what was most important to me in life, how did I define that? How did I put it down on paper? And see how it was guiding me along the way. Was I had been doing it for a long time, but no one had ever really actually asked me to just kind of lay it out that way until I was going through a leader development seminar for about 6 weeks or so, or 60 days, I should say. And that's where we were actually challenged to do that. I'm like, oh, I've been doing this the whole time. I've just never captured it before, and then how am I messaging that and sharing that with other people, sharing that insight, those gifts, those thoughts, so that others might see it, but see it sooner. Me realizing that I wish somebody would have just said that to me when I was younger, and more impressionable and thinking about what's really most important. Because I don't know if they would have been exactly the same back then, but I can tell you that it would have helped me formulate, I think, a little bit better, think about What is most important? Why is it important in the first place? And what am I doing about it with that, right? Instead of just, like you said, wandering, kind of ambiguously trying to figure things out without a plan or a thought to it, and maybe I'll get lucky and hit something, that
Yep.
sticks, right?
Yeah. They'll hit a goal that they haven't defined.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to talk about specific to, that the value that you have of being rooted in your faith and specifically like your relationship with Christ. How challenging was it for you to kind of stay grounded in that value, when being surrounded in a world that's, focused on war and fighting and battle and that just that the constant aggression of I don't even know if I would call it aggression, but the constant focus on, war and battle. How difficult was that for you to navigate? I'd imagine being surrounded with guys that don't share that same value. How'd you navigate that, and what was your experience with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would tell you that um, when it came to faith in the military, it's the same as you see me present day. Um, I was unafraid to tell people that I was a Christian from when I entered West Point to, the present day here in my assignment, because I needed people to know and understand, what made me tick inside, why
Yeah.
I acted or did the things that I did. And not to say that I was going to beat you across the head with my Bible. It was just to tell you that this was important to me. This was something I believed in. And I just ask that you know and understand and respect that just as much as I'll respect you for whatever faith you carry, and whatever spiritual choices you make and so on. And to be honest with you, Josh, no one ever had an issue with that. I used to get more praise for being open about my faith and unafraid to do that, to openly thank God in speeches or open up, events that I was in command of with prayer, because that's the way that I believed it should be done, right? And it wasn't me trying to, again, influence anybody. It was just saying that I believe God put me in the position to lead people in the United States Army. And so God is the leader in front of me that I follow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I needed people to know and understand that and see that. Um, and the other thing that I think was important, was giving people a sense of hope and love and faith, and understand where it came from in me. And I think that in the end, to me, it always served as a great opportunity to witness, to be able to witness through action or through words, or just um, in those difficult times when people needed, prayer, or just for me to be able to recognize when I needed help and I needed my chaplain to come and pray over me, right? And
Yeah.
so I would tell you, my experience in the military has been pretty fantastic with it, and I've never had really issues with that. When you talk about, some of the implications of serving in an organization that is tasked to win our nation's wars, I think more than anything else, it brings humanity, to bear more so than probably your average American. Recognizing that you face death, whether you step into the aircraft or you go into a combat zone, probably more so than most. And so I think to me, it just always made me very, aware that this could be the last day that I'm here on Earth, and I may, be meeting, God sooner than later. And I'd had to be okay with that, right? And I think for a young person in their 20s that looks forward to getting married, starting a family, having grandkids, living the American dream, is that can be hard, to accept that, God, if this is, your path for me, I understand, but I really don't want to,
Yeah.
and I think that to me was probably the hardest thing of navigating, when you talk about combat zones and extreme conditions and challenging and adversarial situations, but they're what you call tests of faith, Josh. In the end, do I feel like I came out a stronger Christian from some of those scary experiences? Absolutely. Do I acknowledge when God needed to get my attention, through the good years and bad, to remind me that I needed to come back to Him and walk closely with Him? Yes. And quite honestly, I think it is because of my faith and my military career that I'm, in the state that I'm in, of sound mind and sound body, and just, my family receiving all the favor, and provision and things, me sitting back and kind of looking at everything, 23 years here and backwards and going, there was a lot of hard days and a lot of things that I just had to kind of just pray to and trust that God had it. And you can sit back over time and go, it's happened, right? So I would tell you, to me, there might have been some challenges, but life is supposed to be that way, right? It was designed for us to have struggles, and I think it brings you closer in your faith to God. And so I can honestly say that that's definitely the case for me.
Yeah, and I love that, because I always, like, one of the frame of minds that I try to help people see is, there's one thing in this life that we're not guaranteed, and that's time. And like, the most logical question for me is, okay, well, what happens next?
Yeah.
And I like being at peace with that answer. I think is I try to put myself in that mindset right now, and I can imagine how much more that would be, prevalent in my life, in my mindset, if, really in those combat zones, in those scenarios of really being, like, having to be at peace with that answer. Because I look at it right now, like, I have friends that, had, life-ending car accidents in college,
Yeah.
where, using those as situations to say, while we're not, fighting in combat, like, there is still, things that happen in our day-to-day life that we can't control,
Yeah.
that we are not in control of what happens next. And so many people, I think, operate when in regards to their faith, professing believers, a lot of them think that they can, tackle the world of their faith later on in life, and they'll handle it later. Like, they want to have their fun now, and they'll handle it later. Like, guys,
Yeah.
you're walking a tightrope with that, because, like,
Yeah.
that while that might be great, you might, that hopefully that happens, but who's to say you'll make it? Like, and I know that's morbid to talk like that, but it's the reality that I try to get in that frame of mind. And I love hearing you talk about that with those combat zones, because it puts you in that frame of mind. You have no choice.
Yeah, it's really about context, Josh, and that's where I think it's so critical as leaders to be able to provide that to those we lead is, the things that we've navigated and survived. It's not to say, look at how awesome we are. It's to say, we don't want you to walk through those same scenarios without being prepared. It's
Yeah.
not to say I can remove everything hard in front of you. You're going to get obstacles in front of you, and you're going to have to navigate it. But I hope to give you better tools, through wisdom, knowledge, experience, whatever it may be, that you have a better mindset than I did when I encountered it, or you're at a stronger walk at that point in your faith than I was,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I think, we really owe it to our people that we lead, the example that we set, how we live our everyday lives to be able to navigate it. Because it's not like life is getting easier. Yeah, there are things that get easier, whether it's technological innovations, you highlighted about AI use in your podcast. I mean, yeah, there's enablers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, some of the conditions are still the same, if not worsened at times. And so,
Yeah.
how do we equip, those to be mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally, socially strong, and be able to lean on each other or know when to ask for help, when they need it, and do those things so that they can navigate this difficult journey called life and do it in a way still with love and joy and peace and all the different fruits of the spirit, being excited about what lies ahead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I really do think it's when you set context and perspective, and if we can translate that, at whatever generation, I think that really and truly, helps set the foundation for those types of realizations, right?
Yeah. Awesome. I love it, man. I want to give you a second to talk about your family, because I know, knowing you for the short period of time that we've known each other, it's so easy
Yeah,
to tell that how your family drives you in so many
yeah.
different ways. So like, what does your family mean to you?
It's everything. I recognize, and so a lot of people are very surprised when we talk about, what did I set out to hope and achieve, in my lifetime. And a lot of people would expect, like, making general, or or doing some great and amazing, thing, or I don't know, just it's never, the response I get when I say I wanted to be, married to my soulmate and to be a dad. And they kind of look at me funny, like, what, really? And I'm like, yeah. Or they ask, what am I going to do in retirement? And I said, I'm going to give all of my time to my wife and my children. I want to be a stay-at-home dad. I want to be a part of the PTA. I want to be able to be there anytime someone calls and not be at my office or deployed somewhere or whatever, where someone's like, so can you come get your kid? And I'm like, I'm going to figure that out. I'll get back to you. And I think it throws people off just because of just, where people's values are and what they find important, and to me, growing up with, having a father that wasn't present a lot because of career, which at this day and age, I understand obviously now. But I didn't want that for my family. I prayed to God that I would find my soulmate that he had picked for me, that I would be blessed to have a wonderful and amazing marriage and to be able to have children that I could pour into and love on and all those things, and do that while I was present in their lives. Not saying that I don't care for them to know the military or know my service and background. It's just that I don't want them to have suffered, because of my absence or because of something, that I had been called to do or committed to do. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity to do that, and I'd give any of it all up 10 times over for them, to sacrifice whatever it is I need to for them. They are the things that I absolutely pour into every bit of what I've got, Josh, and I love sharing their stories, stories like, Brandy growing up, in such a impoverished state, without having access to or opportunities to education, and she in her adult life, after being an entrepreneur and starting her own businesses in San Diego, to be some of the most successful, salons in the area. And then she decides to pivot, get a college degree. Nope, one's not enough. I'm going to get two. Then I'm going to get a master's degree during COVID, and then I'm going to get certified because my children are diagnosed autistic in a field that she's never even set foot in, but did because of my children, and now serves a community at large to help, like a nonverbal autistic teenager to now go from not speaking at all to talking for the first time in 15 years, like that's the kind of incredible stuff that I enjoy watching my wife thrive like that. My children, the same way, some people will look at me when I tell them they're autistic and they're like, oh, I'm sorry. And I'm like, I'm not, it's tough. I'm not going to lie that it's not what you envision as a parent, what your life is going to be like. But the joy that each of them bring just by looking at me and smiling, or me knowing that they know how much that myself and Brandy love them, and that we're going to do everything that we possibly can to give them the best life possible, fight for their independence, their education, and make them into the best people, ultimately hoping, that we are able to shape their spiritual lives to where they can give their lives to Christ, be followers of the way, and use their stories, to impact Christians around the world, and so that's just the immediate side, Josh. And again, I think it's just because I recognize and know, well enough, having seen the good and the bad in this world, the good and the evil, if you will, is when you have something good and amazing in front of you, given by God, you grab a hold of that, you hang on to it, and you just pour into it every bit of your energy that you can, because like you said, tomorrow's not guaranteed. And so I don't know when the last day is I'm going to be a husband to Brandy or a father to Mika and Zion. So yeah.
I love it. And I love hearing you talk about it for me right now, because my wife Jade and I are we're having our first baby girl in September. So here she's 8 weeks out. So I'm constantly
girl dad, man. Girls
I
rule.
know.
They're awesome.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
But I'm my mind is obviously very engulfed in the world of just like understanding. I'm anxious for that. The joy of having that connection of having your baby girl or baby boy look at you with that smile, and like I'm ready for that emotional connection with that. So I love hearing you talk about it. It's really cool that you get to experience that, and that you've put yourself in a position to where you can make the decision on giving all of your time to them and what their passions and joys are rather than your own.
Well, I think one more thing, for you to look forward to, Josh, as a follower of the way too, is, you will experience unconditional love and have some relative perspective of what God has for us as his children, right?
Mm,
Because, like Jaden and you and your relationship, you formed it, separately, right? And so there are times that you may get into it, and you can feel that there is some of that love that gets challenged, right? But you work your way back to it. That's why marriage is so difficult,
yeah.
but find me a parent, that is a believer and, that doesn't love their child unconditionally, right? That would do absolutely anything till their dying day. I had mentioned my grandmother before, Bonnie Buckner. Um, she continued to raise her oldest son, Gary, who just had struggles in life until he was well into his 70s, and never quit on him, because she loved him unconditionally, just like God loves each and every one of us. And I think that that's such an important thing for a parent to realize, as you get to experience the amazingness of truly loving something that God's given you unconditionally. And now you can relate to what it means when Jesus went to the cross. He gave his son for us to die, or for us to accept his death on the cross for our sins and to sacrifice that. You put yourself in that situation, say, could I do that to my own daughter? No, I couldn't. No, I wouldn't, right? But he did. And I think that it to me serves as an opportunity for you to grow in your faith and your
Mm.
wife to do the same, and see how your daughter is going to change you, by God giving you that. So I'm excited for you guys. Being a parent is amazing, and when you intertwine your faith into that, I think you're going to see some additional growth and some additional things, that you might not have realized before. Take it from somebody who didn't. When I was, approaching that first child like you, man, I never thought like that. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, awesome. I love it, man. Well, one as we kind of wrap up, there's one question that I love finishing my episodes with, and take a step. My main purpose behind Take a Step is equipping young adults to discover and start living according to their purpose. And I think so many guys fall into the trap of doing what they feel like they're supposed to do, getting back to kind of what we were talking about earlier with not making decisions for themselves and what brings them their true joy and fulfillment. So, my question is like, what do you think keeps people from taking action on a life that actually brings them purpose and fulfills that purpose?
Yeah, I think it's an extremely tough and an extremely powerful question, Josh, because the truth is that there is no easy answer to it. I think it's going to be different, and I'm sure it's been different with every person you've spoken to and asked. I think from Boyce Buckner's perspective, right? And I don't want to oversimplify. I don't want to generalize. It's just from me walking life and trying to be a purpose-driven individual. Is I think number one is understanding that you don't define your purpose. God defines that.
Mm.
And I think if you can be mindful of that and understand that you may say, and I'll give you a perfect example is that I swore up and down that I would never go into the military, like I shared with you in high school. And yet here I am standing in front of you today as a 23, year veteran of the United States Army and still serving, and recognizing that God, placed me into the United States Military Academy. He placed me in all those assignments to do these specific things to demonstrate, His power through me as a vessel, or to be there as a leader for the people who needed that, whatever it may be. He had His purpose and reasoning, as well as developing and refining me for something bigger down the road. Not sure what that is yet. But I can tell you that I feel Him pouring into me each and every day in different aspects of it, through education, through qualification, growth in family, growth in church. There's something that's brewing, and I wish I could tell you what it is. I don't. But I acknowledge that He has a purpose for me as a leader in this world. And so that's what I'm going to continue to do until He tells me to do something different, right?
Mm.
And I think if we as a human, race can acknowledge that first, then things start to unfold as we start to become obedient and walk and follow that purpose. I think, following back to like books, Rick Warren, Purpose Driven Life, right, is is when we can acknowledge that, then other things start to fall in line. And so I think that would be the number one thing that I would say to people is where is your faith, and do you understand the purpose for that, who designed you, for how you were created and what you were specifically created for. Because if you're running into closed doors, if you're running into constant issues, if you're encountering all these things, well, maybe perhaps it's because you are not listening right now and you're still trying to do your own thing. And a story I give with that is there's this awesome pastor, Miles McPherson, used to play defensive back for the San Diego Chargers, and he had a miraculous turnover from a crazy wild life of professional athlete and doing whatever he felt like to turning his life over to God and starting an amazing church, in San Diego that Brandy and I used to go to. And when he shares a story about, starting the Rock church, he was met with nothing but resistance in the very beginning journeys, and the way he described the story is far greater than I can do, in the time that we have. But what I could say is that he stopped, and he realized that he was not following the way. And he recognized that that's why he was encountering all the difficulties he was having. So when he got out of the way and he started following Jesus closer, is all of a sudden then the Rock began to form, the church began to form, and then it turned into this most influential Christian influence in the West Coast, and that's just one of those examples I give, is get out of the way to allow God to show you the way. And so to me, that's probably what I would give you as the most principal thing, I think, especially among believers and followers of Jesus. The second thing I would say, is just knowing and understanding and being confident in who you are, right? I think, it is a challenge for anybody in this day and age to be able to sit and say, this is who I am, this is who God designed me to be, and I am perfect in his eyes. And I win in the end, right? And to be able to be confident and mentally, emotionally, and spiritually strong in that way, it takes time. It takes, development, like a workout, in the gym, and it takes habit, And I think that that's something that we have to pour into our youth to build those muscles, from an environment that says otherwise, right? That you're not good enough, or that you're different, or whatever it may be that tries to push them down instead of build them up, and to me, I think that type of confidence, in knowing who you are and knowing who stands for you and who defends you, is so critical, and sometimes I think lacking. And the third, honestly, is I think it's really and truly, kind of considering that victim mentality versus victor mentality. I look at myself and say that I consider myself a spiritual warrior, right? And I say that because I use the metaphor, of always being in a fight or a battle. And it's not to say that I'm going around looking for a fight or a battle. It's saying that that's just the environment that we're in. I refuse to accept defeat, and I refuse to accept that I'm the victim in any situation, and instead saying that, something is happening to me and I may not like it, but there's something to be gained from that, rather than allowing that experience to push me down and to shut me down, right? And I think it's all too easy for somebody to walk away from something and just say, I quit, or it's someone else's fault, or whatever it may be, rather than taking a step back and going, why is this happening to me? Let me start, by drawing a dot in the middle of my desk and doing a circle outward. So it starts with me, and then I start to assess everything else around me, and waiting for somebody to solve that problem for me, right? Versus me going to God and saying, God, here's what my problem is. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Where should I go? What should I do? And then start moving forward, right? You mentioned Jocko, and I love sharing this with others. I don't know where his faith lies, so I can't say that, I could speak on behalf of his Christianity, but I can tell you a philosophy that addresses, that is his YouTube video called Good. He's notorious for saying good to any bad thing that happens, because he acknowledges, that he's still alive, that he's still breathing, that he still has fight left in him, right? And to me, it's always a good motivator to remind people, that it's good, right? Because we can always get better. And so how do we change that mindset, to be moving forward, to taking one step forward and keep moving forward, right? Or like Rocky Balboa says in one of my favorite Rocky movies, as he, you know, getting onto his son for being this victim, right? Is telling him, that life isn't about how hard you hit, but how hard you can get hit,
Yeah.
how much you can get hit and keep moving forward, how much you can take and keep moving forward, because that's how winning is done, right?
Yeah.
And I think in the end, if we take a moment to look at that and say, yeah, things are going to be hard. Stuff's going to get thrown at me that I don't like, and I have to learn how to approach and deal with that. But if I have a good foundation to always fall back on, that faith to fall back on, to then gather up, go to my community, go to the people who love me, remind myself of who I am and move forward and follow in that purpose. To me, those are the things that if you can do the opposite of what I was just talking about, that I think deter people from growth, is I think that you turn that into a powerful process that allows you to move towards ultimate potential and growth, and achieving what it is that I think is designed for you, to achieving that true greatness that God has for his people, for his purpose and his design. So hopefully that answers your question, brother.
Dude, guys, if you made it to the end of this episode, you just got filled with a healthy dose of wisdom and inspiration to go out and get after it. I mean, that was awesome. Just everything from, realizing that you don't define your purpose, God defines your purpose, getting out of the way so that, you can start following the way. And like you said, understanding that, whatever comes our way, it's good. And, if it's good, it's bad, it's good because, whatever comes our way, we can take it and keep moving forward. So, I mean, I love the answer. And dude, it's been awesome getting to, know a little more about your background and, what makes you tick and, what's molded you into, the person you are today with the vast wisdom that you have to share. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing it with the Take a Step community.
Yeah, well, you're too kind, brother. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story. Love what you do, Josh. It's fantastic, and I'm excited to see it continue to grow into the great potential I see for it. You are absolutely great at what you do, man, and I think it's going to be very cool to see this as we look back years from now. So.
Yeah, awesome. Love it. Well, guys, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Take a Step podcast. If you liked it, please, like, comment, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music, leave a rating or a review, and we will talk to you in the next episode. Peace.
We'll see you, brother.